The market was alive with a noise, the sound of sellers shouting and buyers arguing over prices, the smell of roasted food mixed with the bitter smoke of broken engines. Humans and aliens walked side by side but never too close. Trust was rare here. In the corner of the market, near the trash heaps, 3 small alien children sat, their clothes torn, their faces pale with hunger, their strange eyes glowing faintly in the shadows. Nobody looked at them for more than a second. People passed by. Some shook their heads. Some whispered, but no one stopped. Then came a young human. His name was Daniel. He was not rich, not strong, not important. He worked as a simple cleaner in the market, carrying buckets and sweeping dirt. People often laughed at him, called him useless, called him soft, but today he stopped. His eyes caught the sight of the alien kids. They were trying to eat something from the trash, pulling old bread covered with dust. One of the boys coughed. The youngest, a girl, tried to hide her tears. Daniel felt something twist in his chest. He knew this pain. He had been hungry once too. He put down his bucket, walked slowly toward them, his steps heavy, because he knew the eyes of the market were on him. "Here," he said softly, kneeling down. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small loaf of bread he had saved for his own lunch. The alien children froze, their eyes wide. They didn't trust him. No one ever gave them food before. Daniel tore the bread in half and placed it on the ground in front of them. "Eat," he said. "It's yours now." The eldest alien boy looked at him, his voice weak but firm. "Why?" he asked in broken human tongue. Daniel smiled a little. "Because you're hungry." That simple answer made people nearby laugh. A group of merchants shook their heads. One muttered, "Fool, wasting food on aliens." Another spat on the ground. "Humans must care for humans, not strays." Others joined in. "He's a fool, helping those who will bring trouble." But Daniel ignored them. He watched the children slowly reach for the bread, their hands shaking as if afraid it would be taken away. When the youngest girl finally took a bite, her glowing eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of relief. Daniel sat on the ground near them, not caring about the dirt. He pulled out a small flask of water and gave it to the middle child. "Drink," he said slowly. The boy obeyed, sipping carefully, then passed it to his sister. The voices around grew louder. "He'll regret this. They'll steal from him. They'll curse him." Some even pointed, laughing, but Daniel stayed calm, his heart heavy but warm at the same time. The eldest alien boy finally spoke again, his voice a whisper. They call you fool." Daniel nodded. "Yes, they do." The boy hesitated, then said, "But you're a kind fool." Daniel chuckled softly. "I'll take that," he said. For a brief moment, the market noise seemed far away. The children sat closer, no longer hiding, no longer afraid to breathe. Daniel noticed scars on their arms, marks that looked like burns. His smile faded. "Who did this to you?" he asked, but they looked down silent. One of the merchants nearby shouted, "Leave them, fool, before their trouble becomes yours." But Daniel's eyes stayed on the children. Something inside him refused to walk away. The youngest girl tugged at his sleeve, her voice like a broken bell. "Hunters," she whispered, just that one word. Daniel frowned. "Hunters?" But before he could ask more, she pressed her tiny finger to her lips. "Shh." Daniel felt a shiver run down his back. The word, hunters, echoed in his mind. Who were they? Why were they after children? The alien boy leaned close, his glowing eyes serious. "If you help, you must not fear." Daniel wanted to laugh at that because he was already afraid, but he nodded anyway. "I don't fear," he said. Even though his heart beat fast, the crowd around had already moved on. Merchants busy with their deals, guards walking past without caring, but somewhere, in the shadows at the far end of the market, a pair of eyes watched Daniel and the alien kids, sharp and cold, eyes that belonged to someone hunting. Daniel didn't know it yet, but by giving bread and water, by being called a fool, he had already stepped into something much bigger, something dangerous, something that would test him in ways he never imagined. As the alien kids finished eating, Daniel stood and said quietly, "Come, I'll find you a safe place." The eldest hesitated, but then nodded. They stood, weak but ready to follow, and from the corner, those cold eyes narrowed. A whisper carried in the wind. Found them. The kindness of a fool had lit a fire, and soon the whole market, the whole city, maybe even the whole world would feel its heat. The market lights faded one by one, stalls closed, voices disappeared. The once crowded street was now quiet, Only the sound of wind moving between broken walls and the rustle of paper scraps remained. Daniel walked slowly, carrying a small bundle of cloth. Behind him, the 3 alien children followed, their steps soft, their glowing eyes glancing everywhere. Fear never left their faces. He led them to a small abandoned storage shed near the edge of the district. He had used it before to rest during long work shifts. No one cared about it. It smelled of dust and rust, but it was dry and it was hidden. "Stay here tonight," Daniel whispered. Opening the door, the children entered carefully, their movements quiet. The youngest girl clutched his sleeve for a moment, then let go, stepping inside. Inside the shed, the floor was uneven, covered with old boxes and broken tools. Daniel lit a small lamp. The dim light filled the space. The children sat together in the corner, close, their heads almost touching. He gave them what little food he had left, a few dried fruits and a piece of bread. They ate slowly, carefully, as if every bite must last forever. Daniel didn't eat, he only watched. His eyes full of questions. "Why are you alone?" he asked softly. But no one answered. The children looked at each other, silence heavy in the air. Later, as night grew colder, Daniel wrapped his coat around the youngest girl, then leaned back against the wall, pretending to rest, his eyes half closed. But he was listening, and then he heard it, whispers. The children spoke in their alien tongue, words flowing like music but filled with sorrow. Their voices too low for anyone else, but the shed was small, and Daniel heard more than they wanted him to. "Hunters, searching," the eldest boy whispered, his tone sharp. Mother said run. The middle one replied, his voice trembling. "We cannot go back." The youngest sobbed quietly, her tiny hand clutching her necklace. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He didn't understand all the words, but he caught enough. "Hunters running, mother. Cannot go back." He leaned closer. "Who are these hunters?" he asked, his voice quiet but serious. The children froze. The eldest boy turned to him, his glowing eyes bright in the dim light. "You were not meant to hear," he said, his human tongue broken but clear. Daniel shook his head. "You don't need to hide from me. If someone is after you, I need to know." The boy hesitated, then looked at his siblings. They nodded slowly. Finally, he whispered, "Hunters take us, sell us?" "Kill us." Daniel's eyes widened, his stomach turned. He had heard rumors of slave traders, cruel groups who hunted the weak, but he never thought they would come after children. "Why you?" he asked, his voice almost breaking. The boy lowered his head, his small hands trembling. "Because we are not just children," he whispered. "We are—" He stopped. The youngest pressed her hand over his mouth before he could finish. Shaking her head fast, Daniel frowned, confusion growing. But before he could speak again, the youngest leaned close to him, her eyes filled with tears. "If you keep us," she whispered, "danger will come." Daniel looked at her, then at the others, their faces pale, their bodies shaking. They expected him to send them away, to protect himself, but instead, Daniel spoke slowly, his voice steady. "I don't care if danger comes. I will not leave you." The silence after his words was heavy. Even the wind outside seemed to stop. The eldest boy looked at him as if trying to see inside his heart, then finally said, "You are fool." "But brave fool," Daniel almost laughed. "Maybe so," he replied. "But I'd rather be a fool who helps than a man who turns away." The children didn't smile, but something softened in their eyes. Suddenly, a noise echoed outside the shed. Footsteps on gravel, slow and heavy. Daniel tensed. He moved to the window. Peeking through a crack in the shadows, a group of tall figures passed by, their faces hidden by masks, weapons glinting faintly under the moonlight, their steps silent but organized. Hunters. Daniel's heart pounded. He pulled back quickly, pressing his finger to his lips. "Quiet," he whispered to the children. They obeyed, holding their breath, their small bodies trembling in fear. The hunters paused near the shed. One of them sniffed the air. The sound was sharp, inhuman. Daniel froze, his hand gripping a broken metal pipe he found near the wall. His muscles tense. After a long moment, the hunters moved on, their footsteps fading into the night. Daniel let out the breath he had been holding. The children clung to him, the youngest hiding her face in his chest. He wrapped his arm around her gently. "It's all right," he whispered, though his own voice shook. "They're gone. For now." But he knew the truth. They weren't safe, not here, not anywhere, unless he found a way to protect them. As the night went deeper, Daniel sat awake, watching over the children as they slept, their whispers still echoing in his mind. "Hunters, mother, not just children. Danger will come." And in the distance, the masked figures walked silently. One of them murmured to another, They are near, I can feel it. The hunt was only beginning. And Daniel, the fool of the market, had already placed himself in the center of it. The morning sun rose weakly over the broken city. The market woke again with shouts, footsteps, and the clash of coins. But for Daniel, the noise felt sharper today. Every sound made him look over his shoulder. Every shadow felt like it was watching. He had left the alien children hidden in the shed, telling them not to move, not to make a sound until he returned. His plan was simple: buy some food, gather blankets, and find a safer place. But deep inside, he knew nothing would be simple anymore. As he moved through the market, whispers followed him. "There goes the fool," someone muttered. "Still feeding aliens," another sneered. "He'll bring hunters to our door." Their laughter rang like knives. Daniel ignored them, but his hands shook slightly as he picked out bread and dried meat. He traded his day's wages for the food. He would go hungry again. But the children would not. On his way back, he noticed something: a group of tall strangers moving through the crowd. Their cloaks long, their boots heavy. They carried no goods to sell. They asked no prices. Their masked faces turned from stall to stall. Searching, always searching, Daniel froze, his chest tightening. Hunters, they were here in the open. One of them stopped near a merchant, holding up a small device that blinked faintly. "Seen them?" The hunter's voice was low, mechanical. The merchant shook his head quickly, eyes down, afraid. Daniel moved fast, slipping behind a row of stalls, his heart beating like a drum. He had to get back to the shed before they did. But as he turned down a narrow alley, a voice called out, "Hey, fool!" Daniel stopped. It was a man he knew, Jarek, a heavy-set worker from the loading docks. Jarek smirked. "Heard you've been feeding strays. Tell me, how much did they pay you? Or maybe you like alien trash?" Daniel clenched his fists. "Not now, Jarek," he muttered, trying to pass, but Jarek stepped in front of him. "Not now? You think you're better than us helping them while we starve?" His voice grew louder, drawing attention. The hunters at the far end of the street turned their heads. The blinking device in their hand beeped faintly. Daniel's stomach dropped, panic flashing in his eyes without another word. He shoved past Jarek and ran. The bag of food clutched tightly. "Hey!" Jarek shouted, but Daniel didn't stop behind him. Heavy footsteps echoed. Hunters pushing through the crowd, their cloaks sweeping the ground. People scattered out of their way. No one dared to block them. Daniel raced through twisting alleys, sweat dripping down his face. He knew every shortcut, every broken path, but the hunters were fast, too fast at the shed. The alien children waited, their glowing eyes wide as Daniel burst in, gasping. "We have to go." Now the eldest boy stood quickly. "Hunters?" he asked. Daniel nodded. "Yes, they're close." The children grabbed what little they had, the youngest still clutching her necklace. Daniel pushed them toward the back door. "Follow me," he ordered. They ran together through narrow lanes, Daniel leading, the children close behind. But the sound of footsteps grew louder, hunters spreading out, closing in from every direction. At one corner, Daniel stopped. Pressing the children against the wall, he peeked around. 2 hunters stood at the far end of the street, scanning slowly, their masks glowing faintly. The middle child whispered, "They smell us," his voice shaking. Daniel swallowed hard. "Then we don't give them time." He spotted a stack of crates nearby, an idea forming quickly. "Stay close," he whispered. He grabbed a loose piece of metal and threw it across the street. The noise clattered loudly. The hunters turned at once, moving toward the sound. Daniel rushed the children down the opposite path, their small feet barely keeping up, but the hunters were not fools. Within moments, more shadows appeared ahead, blocking the exit trapped. The eldest child's voice trembled. "We cannot run forever." Daniel tightened his jaw, holding the broken metal pipe like a weapon. "Then we fight," he whispered, though fear burned in his chest. The hunters stepped closer, their eyes cold behind their masks. One of them pointed, "Hand them over, human, and you may live." Daniel stood firm, the children clutching his clothes. "You'll have to go through me." His voice cracked but did not break. The hunters laughed, a cruel sound. "Fool," one hissed, raising a weapon, and then a sound echoed from above, a sharp whistle. The crates Daniel had noticed earlier came crashing down, smashing into the hunters. Dust filling the air, Daniel blinked in shock. Someone had pushed the crates, but who? From the rooftop, a figure slipped away into the shadows, too quick to see. "Move," Daniel shouted, pulling the children through the chaos. They ran again, hearts pounding, lungs burning, the hunters shouting behind them. Every corner now felt dangerous, every shadow alive. They had escaped once, but Daniel knew they wouldn't always be so lucky. As they reached another abandoned warehouse, the eldest child stopped, looking at Daniel with fierce eyes. "You risk your life for us," he said. "Do you know what we are?" Daniel shook his head, breathless. "Children who need help. That's all I need to know." The boy whispered something in his alien tongue. The others nodded, their eyes heavy with secrets. Daniel leaned against the wall, gripping his pipe, sweat dripping. His heart racing outside, the hunters regrouped, their voices cold and certain. "They are near," one said. "The fool has them." But not for long. The shadows were closing in, and Daniel's kindness had now become a war he could not walk away from. The warehouse stood at the edge of the city, forgotten by most, its walls cracked, its roof half collapsed. Once it had been used to store machine parts, now it was nothing but dust and shadows. Daniel pushed the heavy door open, the rusted hinges crying out inside. The air smelled of metal and damp wood, but at least it was safe for now. He led the alien children inside, closing the door behind them. The youngest girl held his hand tightly, her small fingers trembling. The middle boy kept looking over his shoulder, while the eldest scanned the room carefully, his glowing eyes sharp. He didn't trust the silence. Daniel set down the bag of food and water. "We'll stay here tonight," he said quietly, his voice tired but steady. "It's hidden. The hunters won't find us so quickly." The children gathered in a corner, sitting close to one another. Daniel sat across from them, his body aching, his mind restless outside. The faint sound of the market could still be heard, but here the silence felt heavy. He studied them more closely now, their clothes torn, their faces pale. But there was something else, the way they carried themselves, the way the eldest boy watched the shadows like a soldier, the way the youngest girl clutched her necklace as if it was more than jewelry. Daniel finally asked, "Who are you really?" The children exchanged glances. The eldest shook his head. "You should not know," he said, his human tongue broken but clear. Daniel frowned. "If I'm risking my life, I deserve the truth." The boy hesitated, then slowly pulled the necklace from the youngest girl's hands. Holding it in the light, it shimmered faintly, carved with strange symbols. Daniel leaned closer, squinting. The boy whispered, "This is royal mark." Daniel's heart skipped. He stared at the necklace. "Royal?" he repeated. The boy nodded. "Our blood? Not common." Daniel sat back, the weight of their words sinking in. They weren't just lost children. They were heirs to something bigger, something powerful. The middle child added softly, "Our mother, she was taken." His voice cracked. "She told us run. She gave us this, told us to keep safe." The youngest girl whispered, "Hunters know. They want us because of this." She clutched Daniel's arm, her glowing eyes wet with tears. "If they find us, they will kill you too." Daniel took a deep breath, his mind spinning. He wanted to walk away, to pretend none of this mattered, but when he looked at their faces, so young, so fragile, he knew he couldn't. "I'm already in it," he said firmly. "So I'll see it through." The eldest boy studied him carefully, then gave a small nod. "Then you are not fool," he whispered. "You are guardian," Daniel almost laughed. "Guardian? Me?" He shook his head. "I sweep markets, I carry buckets. I'm no guardian." The boy's glowing eyes softened. "Guardian is not chosen by power," he said. "Guardian is chosen by heart." The words stayed in Daniel's chest like a fire. Night settled heavy. The children fell asleep one by one, curled together for warmth, but Daniel stayed awake. The necklace's faint shimmer caught his eyes. He wondered what kind of power, what kind of responsibility it carried. Suddenly, a faint noise echoed outside, boots crunching gravel. Daniel froze, moving quickly to the window. Through a crack he saw them, hunters, their cloaks dark, their masks gleaming, slowly circling the warehouse. His chest tightened. Had they been followed? Or had someone betrayed them? He rushed to the children, shaking the eldest boy awake. "They're here," he whispered. The boy's eyes widened instantly. He grabbed the necklace, clutching it close. Daniel moved to the far door. "There's a tunnel," he said, pointing to a half-broken passage he had noticed earlier. It might lead outside the walls. The children followed, their small feet silent on the broken floor. The hunters' voices grew louder, commands in a tongue Daniel didn't understand, but their meaning was clear. As Daniel pushed aside debris to reveal the tunnel, the eldest boy touched his arm. "If they catch us, do not give them this," he whispered, holding out the necklace, his eyes fierce. "Better to break it than give." Daniel hesitated, then shook his head. "I won't let them take you or this," he said firmly, his voice stronger than he felt. The children crawled into the tunnel one by one, Daniel last, pulling the cover back behind him. The hunters' footsteps thundered inside the warehouse, their voices sharp. In the darkness of the tunnel, the children whispered prayers in their alien tongue, their glowing eyes dim like dying stars. Daniel crawled forward, sweat dripping, heart pounding. The tunnel stretched long, the air thick, every sound behind them louder, closer, hunters tearing through the warehouse above, smashing crates, searching. Finally, the tunnel opened into the night air. Outside the city walls, the desert stretched wide under the stars. Cold and endless, the children stumbled out. Breathing hard, Daniel followed, collapsing onto the sand. He looked back at the tunnel entrance. Shadows flickered inside, voices echoing. "They know," Daniel whispered, his eyes hard. "They'll never stop," the eldest boy nodded, holding the necklace close, his face pale but his voice firm. "Then we never stop too." Daniel looked at the children, their small bodies against the vast desert night, and he realized something. He wasn't just hiding them anymore. He was standing between them and the shadows of the whole world, and the shadows were closing in tighter every hour. The desert night had saved them once, but Daniel knew they could not survive outside the city walls for long. The cold was sharp, the sand endless, and the children too weak to travel far. At dawn, he led them back into the city through an old drainage path, a hidden route only workers like him remembered. Their footsteps were slow, careful, the children's glowing eyes dim from exhaustion. "Stay close," Daniel whispered, guiding them through narrow alleys until the familiar noise of the market returned. The smell of food and smoke filled the air, but to him it felt dangerous now, every corner a trap. The children hid their faces under old cloths Daniel had given them. He hoped it would be enough to fool casual eyes. But the hunters were still searching, their presence heavy in the city like storm clouds. Daniel knew they needed supplies, food, blankets, maybe medicine. The children's coughs were growing worse, and the youngest hand shook with fever. He went to a stall he trusted, a man named Oren. A merchant who sold dried goods. Oren had once shared drinks with him after long shifts. Daniel thought maybe he could be trusted. "Oren," Daniel whispered, leaning close, "I need food. But I can't pay full." The merchant raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" Daniel hesitated, lowering his voice. I have children to care for, not mine, but..." He stopped, knowing he had already said too much. Oren's eyes narrowed. "Children?" he asked slowly. "Alien children?" Daniel's chest tightened. "Please, just give me some food. I'll pay you when I can." For a moment, Oren's face softened. He handed over a small sack of bread and fruit. "Take it, Daniel," he said, his voice almost kind, "but be careful." "People talk." Daniel nodded, relieved. "Thank you," he whispered. He didn't see Oren's other hand slip quietly under the stall, pressing a hidden button that lit up faintly, sending a silent signal. As Daniel guided the children away, Oren's smile vanished. He muttered under his breath, "Fool. Better you than me." Across the market, the hunters received the signal on their devices. A sharp beep. One of them turned its mask toward Oren's stall. The red glow in its visor flickering, Daniel led the children through the crowd, unaware that shadows were following. The youngest tugged on his sleeve, her voice weak. "Daniel." "Eyes," she whispered. He looked down. "Eyes." She pointed toward the crowd. Daniel followed her gaze. There, two masked hunters, moving between stalls, their pace slow but direct, their glowing visors fixed on him. Panic surged. "Run," Daniel whispered urgently, pulling the children into a side alley. But before they could get far, more hunters appeared from the other side. The trap closing, the eldest boy's voice shook. "They know," Daniel cursed under his breath. His mind racing, they darted into a storage yard, crates stacked high, workers shouting angrily as Daniel shoved past. "Sorry!" he shouted, dragging the children behind cover. But the hunters were relentless, their heavy steps shaking the ground. Their weapons raised, the crowd scattering in fear. Daniel gripped the broken pipe he carried. His knuckles white, he couldn't fight them all. But he could buy time. "Stay behind me," he ordered the children. His voice hard, the hunters stepped closer. Their voices mechanical. "Hand them over, human, and you will live." Daniel shook his head, sweat dripping down his face. "Not a chance." The hunters spread out, forming a circle. The eldest boy clutched the necklace tight, his eyes glowing brighter with fear. Suddenly, one of the hunters raised a weapon, aiming at the children. Daniel moved fast, swinging his pipe with all his strength. The weapon clattered to the ground, sparks flying. The crowd gasped. Some shouted, but no one moved to help. They only watched, whispering, "The fool fights for aliens. He'll die for nothing," one of the hunters hissed. Lunging at Daniel, he stumbled back, barely blocking with his pipe. The force sent pain shooting through his arms. The children cried out, the youngest clutching Daniel's leg. "Don't leave us," she begged. "I won't." Daniel gritted his teeth, pushing back against the hunter. And then, sudden chaos, city guards rushed in, shouting, "Stop this!" They raised their spears, surrounding the hunters. But the hunters didn't retreat, their voices cold. "We have rights," one growled. "They are ours." The guards hesitated. Unsure, their eyes flicked to the children, then to Daniel in that tense silence. Oren appeared at the edge of the crowd, his arms crossed, his voice loud. "Those alien strays don't belong here, and the fool shelters them. Hand them over before we all pay the price." Daniel's head snapped toward him, betrayal burning in his chest. "You," he hissed, realization crashing down. The eldest boy whispered, his voice shaking with rage. "Betrayal," the crowd murmured. Some nodding with Oren, others silent in fear. The hunters stepped forward again, stronger, closer, their masks gleaming in the sunlight. The trap was nearly complete. Daniel tightened his grip on the pipe, his eyes fierce despite the odds. "You'll have to kill me first," he said, his voice steady. The children pressed close behind him, trembling, their glowing eyes fixed on the hunters. And in that moment, Daniel knew there was no going back. The betrayal had brought the hunters to their very feet, and only a fight would decide who lived through this day. The market exploded into chaos, shouts rising as guards clashed with hunters. Weapons clanged, people screamed, stalls overturned, food and goods scattered everywhere. Daniel didn't wait. He grabbed the children and pulled them through the mess. "Run!" he shouted, his voice sharp over the noise. The eldest boy held tight to the youngest girl. The middle one stumbled, but Daniel caught his arm. Pushing him forward, the hunters roared behind them, their heavy boots pounding the ground. The crowd parted in fear. No one dared to help, only whispers followed. "The fool is running. They'll catch him soon." Daniel pushed through a narrow alley, the children gasping for air, their glowing eyes wide. He knew the hunters were close. Too close. From behind, a metallic voice echoed. "You cannot run, human, surrender." Daniel gritted his teeth, sweat pouring down his face. He didn't look back. "Keep moving," he urged the children. They darted into a maze of streets, rooftops above casting dark shadows. Daniel knew these alleys, he had cleaned them, carried buckets through them. Now every corner became a weapon, every step a gamble. The hunters split into groups, circling, their masks glowing faintly. The sound of their scanners filled the air. Daniel turned quickly into a dead-end street. His chest tightening, the children froze, panic in their eyes. "No way." The eldest cried. Daniel scanned fast, his eyes caught a ladder leaning against a wall. "Up now!" he ordered, boosting the youngest girl first. She climbed shakily, Daniel pushing the others after her. As the hunters entered the alley, Daniel scrambled up last, the metal rattling under his weight. The hunter raised his weapon, firing. Sparks exploded against the ladder. Daniel barely rolled onto the rooftop in time. The children clung to him, their breaths ragged. Daniel pulled them to their feet. "This way," he pointed, racing across the uneven roofs. The city stretched before them, smoke rising from chimneys, bright banners flapping in the wind. But all Daniel saw were escape paths. The hunters followed below, some climbing roofs as well, their speed terrifying, their shadows long against the walls. Daniel ducked under a broken arch, guiding the children across wooden planks bridging rooftops. The planks creaked dangerously. The youngest whimpered. "I'll fall." Daniel steadied her. "Don't look down, just step." Behind them, the hunters leaped across with inhuman grace, closing the gap. One almost landed beside Daniel. But the eldest boy threw a loose brick. Hitting the hunter's mask, it stumbled back, crashing into a rooftop beam. "Good," Daniel shouted, pulling them forward. But there was no time to celebrate. More hunters came, faster than ever. They jumped down into another alley, rolling hard. Daniel's arm burned from the fall, but he pulled the children up, running again. Shouts echoed. City guards tried to block the hunters. Spears raised, but the hunters cut them down with cruel precision. Daniel looked back once, horror filling him, then forced himself forward. "Don't stop." Through the twisting alleys, Daniel used every trick he knew, tipping barrels behind them, pulling down cloth lines to block paths, smashing crates to create obstacles. The middle boy asked breathlessly, "How do you know this city so well?" Daniel gasped. "I've cleaned every corner. And now it saves us, but even with tricks, The hunters kept coming, their cold voices calling. Nowhere to run, fool. Finally, Daniel spotted an old aqueduct tunnel near the river. Its stone walls cracked but still open. "In there!" he shouted. They slipped inside, the air damp and cold, water dripping from the ceiling. The children's steps echoed. Daniel forced himself to stay calm, but his heart pounded. The hunters entered behind them, their lights cutting through the dark. Beams sweeping like knives, Daniel pushed the children ahead. "Faster," he whispered, the tunnel narrowed. Water running at their feet. The noise covered their steps. At one bend, Daniel grabbed a loose beam from the wall and jammed it across, blocking part of the tunnel. It wouldn't stop the hunters for long, but it would slow them. The eldest boy asked, "Why do you risk so much?" Daniel didn't answer at first, his lungs burning. Then he said simply, "Because no one else would." They emerged at the far end, stumbling into the open again. The city lights behind them, the desert wind sharp ahead, but the hunters were still there, climbing out of the tunnel with terrifying speed, their voices echoing, "We see you, human." Daniel's legs shook with exhaustion. The children clung to him, their faces pale, but he forced them forward. Across the city walls, bells suddenly rang. Warning shouts echoed, guards calling to one another. Torches lit up the night sky. The hunters paused for a moment, scanning, their masks glowing brighter. The chase would not end. Daniel knew, but for now the city was awake. He pulled the children into another narrow street, pressing them into the shadows, their breaths ragged, his chest heaving. The youngest girl whispered, her voice breaking, "Daniel, we can't run forever." Daniel closed his eyes for a second, then opened them, fierce and determined. "Then we stop running," he said. Gripping the pipe tightly, the children stared at him, their glowing eyes reflecting the torchlight. The hunters spread again through the city, their shadows stretching long across the stone, searching, circling, closing in, and Daniel, the fool of the market, now stood ready to fight them all. The night burned with chaos, bells still rang. Guards shouted from the walls, and torches lit every street. The hunters moved like shadows, silent and deadly, their masks glowing red. They searched every corner, every alley, closing in from all sides. Daniel stood in a narrow courtyard with the alien children behind him, his broken pipe clenched in his hand, sweat and dust covering his face, his body shaking with exhaustion. But his eyes fierce, the eldest boy whispered, "They are too many," his voice cracked. "We cannot fight." Daniel turned to him, his voice rough but steady. "Then we fight anyway. Because running has ended." The hunters stepped into the courtyard, tall figures surrounding them, weapons raised, their voices mechanical. "Human, step aside, give us the children." "And live," Daniel shook his head, standing taller though his legs trembled. "No, you'll take them only over my body." The hunters laughed. A cruel metallic sound. "Fool," one hissed. "You will die for nothing." Daniel took a step forward, his pipe raised. "Not for nothing," he said firmly. "For them." The children pressed close behind him, the youngest girl clutching the necklace, tears shining in her glowing eyes. One hunter lunged. Daniel swung with all his strength, the pipe smashing against the hunter's mask. Sparks flying, the figure staggered back. But two more advanced weapons flashing, Daniel fought like a cornered wolf. Every strike wild but desperate, his arms burning, his body pushed beyond its limits. The hunters pressed harder, blows raining down. "But he refused to fall. Stay behind me," he shouted, his voice breaking. The eldest boy suddenly cried out in his alien tongue, his voice echoing like a command. The necklace in his sister's hands began to glow brighter, a strange light filling the courtyard. The hunters hesitated, their visors flickering. One hissed, "The mark." "It is true." Daniel glanced back, stunned. The children stood together, their small bodies trembling but their eyes fierce, the light from the necklace spreading across the ground like fire. From above, a deep hum shook the air. Shadows passed over the rooftops. Then a ship descended, sleek, silver, its lights piercing the night. The hunters looked up in alarm, their voices sharp. "No, not them." The ship's ramp opened. Armed alien guards in royal armor stormed out, their weapons glowing, their movements swift. They surrounded the hunters, shouts filling the air. The hunters tried to resist, striking with fury. But the royal guards were stronger, faster, their energy blades cutting through the night. One by one, the hunters fell, their cold voices fading into silence. Daniel dropped to his knees, his chest heaving. His pipe slipping from his bloody hands, he could barely breathe. But he looked at the children safe behind him, and a tired smile touched his lips. The alien commander stepped forward, Tall and proud, his armor gleaming, he looked at Daniel with respect. "Human," he said in a deep voice. "You risked everything for them," Daniel coughed, his voice weak but firm. "They're children. Someone had to." The commander bowed his head slightly. "Not someone you," he said. "You were called fool, but today, you are the reason our heirs live." The crowd that had gathered around the courtyard fell silent. The same people who had laughed at Daniel before now stared with wide eyes. Shame heavy in their faces, no one dared to mock him now. The eldest boy stepped forward, his small hand gripping Daniel's. "You saved us," he whispered. "We will never forget." The youngest girl hugged him tightly, her tiny arms around his neck, whispering through tears, "You are not fool. You are family." Daniel's throat tightened, he hugged her back gently, his heart heavy but warm for the first time. He felt the weight of his choices was worth everything. The commander spoke again. "Our ship will take them home. Their people will know of your courage. Human." He paused, his voice softer. "And if you ever call, we will answer." Daniel nodded weakly, standing with effort, his body aching but his spirit unbroken. He watched as the children walked up the ramp, each one looking back at him with glowing eyes filled with gratitude. The youngest girl pressed her necklace into his hand before leaving, her voice soft. "Keep this so you remember us." Daniel held it tightly, unable to speak, his eyes burning. The ship rose slowly, lifting into the night sky, its lights fading into the stars, leaving the courtyard quiet again. The market people stood in silence. No one called him fool anymore. No one laughed. They only watched him with respect. Some even lowered their heads in shame. Daniel walked slowly back through the streets, bruised, bloodied, but standing tall, the necklace glowing faintly in his hand. He was still just a cleaner, still just one man, but now he was more. He was the fool who had saved them all.